Hello students. So today we are going to discuss a very important topic of the male reproductive system of a flower, and that is the pollen grain. The pollen grain is the male gamete which is present in the reproductive part of a flower, and that is the androcium, that is the male reproductive part of a flower. Okay, so let us see the structure of a pollen grain, how a pollen grain looks like. So all of you have seen pollens in your life, is not it? Different types of pollens are there. The most common example of pollen grain which you might have seen is the pollen grain of hibiscus flower. Hibiscus flower, you know, it's also called China rose, or in Assamese if you say, it is joba full. Okay, there you will see small yellow colored dot like structures are there. Okay, so they are nothing but they are the pollen grains. These are the pollen grains. So if you take a pollen grain in your hand, and if you take little bit of water, and then if you see it in the microscope, you will see the structure of the pollen grain like this. Okay, so here in this diagram you can see there are different parts in a pollen grain. The first is your exine. This is the outermost layer. Can you see? The inner layer is the intine. Then one germ pore is there. This portion it is called germ pore. Okay. Then this is a generative cell, and inside the generative cell you will see a generative nucleus, and then there is a vegetative nucleus also. Okay, so these are the parts of a pollen grain. Now let us see what are the functions of these parts and why are these parts present. Okay, so see here, a pollen grain is a male gametophyte. Male gametophyte means it is a male gamete. Okay, pollen grains are made up of two layered wall. Two layered walls are there. See here, two layered walls are there. This is the wall. The first layer is called the exine, and the inner layer is called intine. Can you see? Exine and intine. Exine is made up of sporopollenin. Sporopollenin is a substance, okay, and this exine is made up of sporopollenin. Sporopollenin is the most resistant organic matter known. This sporopollenin is a substance, and it is an organic matter, and it is the most resistant organic matter which we know till today. Resistance means it is very strong. Okay, it is very strong. It is very strong to outer environment, to the extremities of the environment. It can withstand high temperatures and strong acids and even alkali. That means it can stand against very high temperature also, strong acids also, and also alkali. No enzyme can degrade this sporopollenin. This exine is made up of a substance called sporopollenin. This is the word sporopollenin. Okay, and this sporopollenin is very much resistant or strong in nature. Nothing can come and break this sporopollenin. Okay, that's why it is present in the exine, because see, the pollen grain, it is the main important part of the male reproductive system of the flower. That means it is a male gamete. Okay, so this is responsible for carrying future generations. That means for making new plants, this pollen grain will be very much useful. Okay, so if something happens to the pollen grain, then this male gamete, it will be of no use, and so no new plants will be formed later on. Without the presence of male gamete, plants cannot produce new flowers or new trees or new seeds, is not it? So that's why this pollen grain is very much important. So the outermost layer of the pollen grain must be very strong. That's why this outermost layer is strong, so that it will protect the inner parts, whatever is present inside. Understood? So that's why it is made up of sporopollenin, and it is a very strong substance. It is not even destroyed by temperature also, acids also, and alkali also. Okay, and no even enzyme cannot even degrade this sporopollenin. Understood? Now then, your inner layer is called your intine. It is comparatively it is thin. Understood? This intine is comparatively thin as compared to your exine, and it is made up of cellulose and pectin. Okay, that means this composition of this intine is thin, and it is little bit weaker as compared to this exine, and moreover the substance with which it is made up of is cellulose and pectin. Like sporopollenin is present in exine, similarly intine is made up of cellulose and pectin. Okay, another structure you will see in the pollen grain is your germ pore. See this structure? This is called germ pore. This white color pore like structure. Okay, this is called germ pore. Germ pore is an aperture. Aperture means it is present inside on the it is just an aperture which is present on the exine. Okay, it is a protruding substance which is present in the exine structure, protruding structure. Aperture on exine where sporopollenin is absent. See, I told you the exine is composed of or made up of sporopollenin, but this germ pore, in this germ pore, sporopollenin is not there. That means this germ pore is present on the exine only, but in this portion you see the color is different. Can you see? This exine, it is dark green in color. That means sporopollenin is present. Only this portion, in this portion, sporopollenin is not there. Okay, sporopollenin is not there. So in the germ pore you will not see the presence of sporopollenin. And this germ pore, later on it will form a pollen tube. Okay, it is going to form a pollen tube. One tube like structure will be formed, from which later on it will help in the reproduction or fusion of gametes, or it will help this pollen grain to unite with the male gamete ovum. Okay, so from this portion only a tube will be formed, and that tube will be called as pollen tube. Okay, from this germ pore you will see later on a tube like structure forming, and this tube is called your pollen tube. Pollen tube. Understood? So if somebody asks you from where pollen tube is formed, you must say that the answer is from germ pore. Okay, and one more thing you see, a plasma membrane also surrounds the cytoplasm of the pollen grain. So these are the different parts of a pollen grain, and exine, intine, germ pore, these are the different parts of a pollen grain, and also one plasma membrane will also be there outside. Okay, plasma membrane is called cell membrane. This you have already got in your earlier classes. It is called cell membrane. One cell membrane will also be there, because see, this pollen grain is also a cell only. Okay, if it is a cell, one membrane will be there. So inside this portion it will be one cell membrane is also there, but in this diagram the structure of your cell membrane is not shown. Okay, see, when this pollen grain will become mature, at that time you will also see two new structures forming in the pollen grain. They are your vegetative nucleus and generative nucleus. When the pollen grain is not mature, it's immature, it's small, you will not see these two nucleus present. But when it becomes mature, you will see these two nucleus are being formed. Okay, that is your generative nucleus, and another one is your vegetative nucleus. Now let us know what is the function of these two nucleus. So see, if nucleus is there, that means a cell will also be there. This generative nucleus is being surrounded by a generative cell. Similarly, this vegetative nucleus will also be surrounded by a vegetative cell. Vegetative cell. The vegetative cell is bigger in size. It has abundant of food reserve, and it is large, and it has a large irregular nucleus, and it is responsible for development of pollen grain. Okay, so if you see in this diagram, see this bigger portion is your vegetative cell, and this smaller portion is your generative cell. Can you see? This bigger is your vegetative cell, and this smaller portion is your generative cell. And this red color is your vegetative nucleus. This smaller red color portion is your generative nucleus. Okay, the function of this vegetative nucleus is that it acts as a food reserve. Food will be stored here. And it has a very large irregular nucleus. That means it's not even. The nucleus is not even, but it's irregular. Okay. And it is responsible for the development of pollen grain. So vegetative cell function is for the responsible for development of pollen grain, and it acts as a food reserve. Okay. Now let us see what is generative cell. So I already showed you the structure of this generative cell. This is the generative cell in the pollen grain. You just see what is how the generative cell looks like. It is small. Yes, it is small, you see. Okay, and it involves in syngamy. That means this portion of the pollen grain goes and fuses with the ovum. Understand? That means this portion generative cell takes part in the fertilization process. Okay, this part portion will go and meet the egg or ovum, meet egg. This portion will not go and meet. Okay, this portion will go and meet. This vegetative portion will not go. This will, generative cell will go and generative nucleus will go inside the egg, and it will meet the egg and it will form a zygote. The nucleus of this generative cell is very much dense, okay, and the cytoplasm is also dense. Cytoplasm means the liquid fluid like structure which is present inside this cell, this liquid, this green color inner fluid like proportion is your cytoplasm. This cytoplasm and this nucleus of this generative cell is dense and or thick as compared to this vegetative cell. So here we have seen that this generative cell takes participates in meeting with the egg and carrying this gene to the next generation. Okay, but this vegetative cell, the function is generally for storing of food. Okay, and not only storing of food, also it is responsible for development of pollen grain. Pollen grains of many species, example Parthenium, cause several allergies. So you have seen many people, they suffer from pollen allergy, okay, because pollen grains, they are generally carried by wind. Very easily you will see it is very light. That's why wind can carry pollen grains very easily. And so what happens, it goes inside the respiratory tract of people and it may cause allergy, and also some kind of bronchial diseases in some people. That can also lead to respiratory disorders like asthma, bronchitis, etc. Okay, so different kind of these diseases like asthma, bronchitis, this may happen because of pollen grain. Since it is very small in structure, it can go very easily inside the respiratory tract of human being. And also pollen grains are very rich in nutrients, and it can also be used as pollen tablets and food supplements. In food you can use it as pollen tablets, okay, because it is very high in nutrients. These are the uses. Visibility of pollen grains varies with species to species. They are very small, see, so small that you cannot see them. Sometimes some pollen grains even you cannot see with naked eyes also, but some you can see. It depends upon to which species it belongs to. Okay, and this pollen grain, since it is a gamete, it must go and land the female part of the flower in order to germinate, okay, in order to cause sexual reproduction in that flower. And these pollen grains are very large in number in a species, and they are stored in liquid nitrogen at temperature 196 degrees Celsius, and it is called a pollen bank. Pollen bank is a place where you will find, this is a place where pollen grains can be stored for further use. And how they store this pollen grain? In labs with the help of liquid nitrogen. Okay, they dip this pollen grains inside liquid nitrogen and they keep this at a temperature of 196 degrees Celsius, so that it will remain protected and safe and secure, and it will be good in quality as well. Now let us discuss the uses of pollen grains. As I already told you that pollen grains are very rich in nutrients. So now it has just become like a fashion in recent years to use pollen tablets as food supplements. Okay, in Western countries, a large number of pollen products you will see in the market in the form of pollen tablets or syrups. Okay, they are available in the market, and sports person, athletes, these people or race horses, they consume this tablet in order to increase their performance. So these food supplement, it helps the person who are in sports or athletes or the horses who participate in races in order to boost up their energy. So this is also used as a food supplement in those places, and moreover the reason why this is used is because they are very rich in nutrients. Now you see, once a pollen grain becomes outdated or bad, okay, before it loses its viability, it must go and it must fertilize an egg. Okay, if the pollen grain becomes too old or dry, it will not be able to go and fertilize the egg. So before the pollen grain dies or it becomes wasted, it must be used in its own work. How long do you think a pollen grain can remain viable? Viable means able to reproduce. Okay, the meaning of viable is able to reproduce. Viable means useful. Okay, useful. You may note this down. Viable means useful. You already know that human male gamete, that is sperm, it is being stored in artificial laboratories by storing semen or sperms of many animals. Okay, this is a very famous technique of storing sperms for artificial insemination, so that artificially reproduction can be done. Similarly, pollen grains can also be stored, I already told you, and this is possible by storing the pollen grain inside liquid nitrogen in a temperature of minus 196 degree Celsius. Such stored pollen grain can be used as pollen banks, and this pollen bank is similar to seed bank. Pollen bank means where pollen grains are stored, and seed bank means where seeds of different species of plants are stored. Okay, and this is useful for further purposes. So this is a very short description of the structure of a pollen grain and its use. I hope you have understood it. We will discuss about the female reproductive part of a flower in our next class. Thank you.